Lou Diamond? Sounds like a motivational country singer if you ask me.
It's time to take an inside look at those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level. Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Today on Thrive Loud, we have a keynote speaker who inspires, motivates, and educates businesses on how to leverage emerging technologies in digital marketing. He's currently the founder of iSocialFanz, which has helped launch digital and influencer strategies with the world's most iconic brands. Diehard Pittsburgh sports fan, semi-pro poker player, backwards cap donning, scooter riding, pager wearing millennial, the rock star, Brian Fanzo, is on Thrive Loud. Brian, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great. With that kind of intro, I don't know how I can't be great. I'm excited to be here.
I look forward to that being the next intro, the next time you pop on stage, which is happening a lot these days, Brian. You're bouncing around everywhere. So
yeah, I am. It's a lot of fun.
You are truly one of the more unique on-branded people you'll ever run into, and have a great message with that. I want to get a little history, though, because our listeners, we want to connect you to them as well. Brian, how did this direction of what you're focusing on now become the hot spot and hot thing that you've been doing?
Well, I think, especially for those that, end up in speaking or I think a lot of people today, I think we all like to claim, we have a unique path to where we've come or how it's all happened. And for me, I'm a computer science major that my first job was working for the Department of Defense in cybersecurity. And I worked there for 9 years, traveled to 54 countries at the time. I've actually now been to 76 countries. And I left there, and that wasn't exciting enough. I went to a data center cloud computing company where it was a startup where we were hiring 12 new hires a week. And I worked there for about 2 years and 10 days. And then I've been on my own. I'm coming up on 5 years later this month. But I think for me, the speaking is what I do now. I host a couple of podcasts and I speak full time. I don't think I ever realized, there's two things for me weirdly growing up. Like I didn't realize what marketing was in high school and college. I was always looked at it as like sales enablement and creating, it just wasn't something that was sexy or that I wanted to do. And then speaking really wasn't something that I thought of as a career. And my dream job growing up, graduating college, was to be a technology evangelist, kind of following the footsteps of Guy Kawasaki and what he did at Apple. And at the cybersecurity, when I worked for the U.S. government, my speaking career kind of started there in about 2005, 2006. And I would love to say it was because of my great skills, but my boss at the time came to me and said, you're the only one on our team that isn't gray haired and that can convey a message to both the computer people as well as the government. And so they sent me to training. They sent me to like a week training course. I had to get certified. And then I started briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon here in Washington, D.C. Every quarter. It became kind of the thing that I was doing. And then I started speaking at events. And then when I went to the data center company, I actually did get my dream job. They promoted me after about 6 months there, kind of getting my foot in the door to this technology evangelist role where I had a dotted line to the CMO and a dotted line to the CIO, and I reported to the CEO of the company. And I quickly became kind of the face of that brand. They put my face on the front, when you walked in the front lobby of the company, it became, I started speaking on behalf of the brand. And I think that's where a lot of it kind of came to me was, I don't like to think of myself as a computer person or a social media person or a marketer. What I like to say is I translate the geek speak around things that seem complex. So it can be everything from like a social media tool to artificial intelligence and its impact on empathy. And I really like to be able to kind of, and that's really what I did for the government. It's what I did for the data center. And so it took me a couple of years on my own to kind of figure out how I would productize that and monetize it. But I'm very blessed. I'd like to say 4 years ago, my revenue was about 80% consulting, 20% speaking. And in 2019, it'll be 90% speaking and 10% consulting and podcast sponsorship.
Amazing. And kudos to you, by the way. I'm going to address something that I hit in the beginning, and I think this is interesting. In the way that you were able to communicate to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Thrive Loud listeners will see some interesting artwork of what Brian looks like today. I'm guessing that wasn't the outfit you donned in front of them the first time you presented.
It was not the first time, but I can tell you, I was the very first person to ever to speak in front of the Joint Chiefs without a tie. I've always been one that I can wear a suit and tie. I've never actually had a problem with that role. I worked for the government. I mean, I played that role very well. IBM was one of my very first clients. But I've always been one that kind of pushed the envelope of change. And it was really, what was most comfortable for me. And so I remember I had the tie on backstage the first time I presented to the Joint Chiefs. And I ended up wearing it. And then afterwards, one of the people that knew me very well was like, man, next time, just before you go on stage, just take the tie off. You'll be more comfortable, be more yourself. And then I'd say about a year later, I went on stage without a suit jacket and without a tie. And that was kind of mind blowing. But you're right. I didn't, now I wear backwards hat and some bright, colorful shoes as kind of part of my brand. But I was always trying to kind of push that envelope. And for me, it's not about no suit or tie. It was more about, I want you to be comfortable as I want to be comfortable for myself. And it's kind of where I've kind of fit my brand today. And I'm very lucky that I get to wear what I want and dress how I like and still do what I want to do for a living.
Well, I think it's actually a really important point. And I think this is a great way to bridge technology. In the gig economy, which we are knee deep in, and from whether you're from corporate America or the way projects work, they're all coming together so close and overlapping because they could all benefit from one another. Everyone can learn a little from each other. And I think the more authentic we are in the way we communicate, the better we're going to be. And owning who we are is really important. And this is actually where I wanted to get to. People who have heard Brian Fanzo speak, and I've heard this feedback directly, you project an image that they see and they walk out of there thinking completely differently. Can you share with the listeners maybe how you package your message so that it connects with your audience?
Wow, I appreciate that. And hearing that, I can tell you, it kind of gave me chills because that's where, one of the things that I've talked about a lot, and I kind of referred to myself early on, and actually it was one of my bosses that said, Brian, you're really not a technology evangelist. You're a change evangelist. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of fluffy. What do you mean? And he was like, well, when you work with our clients and our current customers, I was doing things with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Johnson & Johnson, Dell. He's like, most of the time you're helping them remove technology, remove barriers, and just embrace a new model of change. And so when I look at my career and I look at my background and really what I do on stage, and that's why it meant a lot when you said that, I think for change is hard, change is scary, change is unknown. Today in 2019, 2020, change is at a pace that we've never seen before. We're not only kind of changing ourselves, but everything around us is changing. What does the ideal life look like? What does work-life balance? What does going to work even look like? All of this is changing. And so for me, one of the things I kind of realized that, I need people to come on a journey with me. And we all learn differently. No one likes being told to change. I'm a dad of 3 girls, and telling my daughters to do something I quickly learned was not the way to do it. But you said it in the intro, and I think a lot of people say it, but I really work hard on this idea of educating as well as inspiring, and then probably the most important one there is motivating people to actually take the action. And so with my, with the outfit that I wear, or the hat, wearing the hat backwards, or even, how I portray, when I say I work for the U.S. government, they're like, how is that possible, right? Or, they're like, and I had the highest civilian clearance that you could get. I been to Iraq 3 times, Afghanistan twice. And when I start breaking it down, and part of the thing that I really work hard on, and it's where I work hard on my stories, is where I work hard on the podcast as well, is I want people to come on the journey in their own way. Like telling people, it's part of the reason why I love podcasting over video. I mean, I create a lot of video, over 4,000 videos since 2014. But for me, audio content is the gold. And the reason I always say that is because why does someone read a book and they hate the movie? The simple answer to that is when you're reading a book, you get to paint the picture of what you're reading to what you relate to, what you understand. But yet when we watch a movie, just like we watch a video, the creator gets to determine what you are visualizing. And on a podcast right now, those that are listening to this and haven't seen me, first the intro, now, wait, what does this guy wear? Who does he look like? Right. You get to paint your own picture. And as a speaker, I think one of the things for me was, being able, create an emotional connection with someone, even a bad emotional connection. It allows them to be connected in a way that they're still willing to come on the journey with me. And so I build within my presentation different touch points that allow people to go from this idea like, and I hear this a lot where, Brian, I went to your session because I was like, oh God, a typical millennial. I'm going to go in here and hear what this millennial backwards hat wearing guy has to say. And when they go in there, they at least, they have an opinion of me, right? It's rather than going in there with no opinion at all, they now are going in there like, okay, continue to disappoint me, Brian. This is what I expect. And then when all of a sudden they're open to this idea where I'm not telling them that they're wrong. I'm not even telling them that what I'm sharing is right, but I'm sharing kind of a unique perspective. And I want them to look at things differently. And, I'm very close to my parents. My dad was a candy salesman that became a global peanut brittle company that he had. I had a frozen yogurt shop. I like to say I hired and fired my friends before I was 16 years old. And a lot of my and it's a lot of my background, even, like the first 30 employees that worked on our team for the U.S. government were all older than I was. I was the youngest one, and I was the one managing the team. And all of these things have kind of taught me this idea that not only do I respect my elders and I have this opinion that I don't need to know everything, I don't need to be the smartest in the room, but I do like to open people's minds, shift their perspective. And I think to shift a perspective, they have to have a perspective to begin with. And so when someone comes in and they're already judging me or expecting something, and I deliver the opposite, well, now they move to the front of their seat. Their perspective is open to hearing what I have to say. And then I get to bring them on this journey. And it's amazing for me. I'm a Pittsburgh sports fan, as you mentioned. I grew up in Pittsburgh. My mom, I laughed. It wasn't until we moved to Virginia that I realized that not every mom wore black and gold earrings to church. Like I just assumed that was like every city. Like Pittsburgh just kind of lives that way. And when I look at this like total picture of like what I bring people on this journey is that I understand that the world we're living in today can be overwhelming and it can be difficult. And I always use the What About Bob movie with Bill Murray, which, a millennial quoting What About Bob is just a sample of how I kind of dabble on both sides. But it's always about baby steps to the elevator, baby steps to what you're doing. And I try to get people to have that. And so it is funny that, I like to say early on, like I remember IBM, my first couple of times speaking at IBM events, it was blue suit, blue tie, like, and I would be the guy like, well, I'm not going to wear a tie, but I'll wear this suit. And then eventually I went on stage with the look that I have now. I had a backwards hat. I had yellow shoes on at the time. And it was so funny because part of the reason that I got that was they just needed to check a checkbox that said, we got the millennial guy on stage. Check. You were the token checkbox. And early on in my career, that being the token checkbox, I actually felt like I was offended by that. But then I realized something. I think this is probably the lesson I think that's helped me the most is that you can't drive change or inspire change unless you're playing the game and you're part of the system. And so for me, a lot of it is, I can play on both sides. I'm very lucky. I had a call this morning with Erie Insurance, a company that I'm giving a keynote to next month. But at the same time, I'm also giving a keynote, at the eTourism Summit focused on, vlogging and content creation in the tourism space. And I think part of the reason I'm able to play on all of these different industries, all of these different types of events is that like my ultimate goal is to get people to just kind of open their mindset and shift their perspective. And that goes into the language I use, the colors on my slides, even the outfit that I wear. And so when you say that, that you've heard that from multiple people, it means a lot to me because I work really hard and some of it has to do with the poker table.
I was going to get there. I was going to get there. Let the listeners, the poker experience, explain how that bridges the gap together for you.
Well, so, and poker, the thing I love about poker is I always say I'm not a gambler. I play poker against people. I don't bet against the house. I'm not a blackjack guy. I'm not a craps. Well, I'll play craps if everybody's out having fun. But for the most part, poker was my game. And the reason I loved poker was that there was many different ways you could win the game, right? You can be a math person. You can be a statistics person. You can be someone that reads the books and understands the algorithm. You can also be a people person, and you can be someone that understands the human dynamic and goes with gut. And for me, the thing that I learned in poker more so than anything else was, I played in the World Series of Poker. I actually got to travel overseas. A lot of it comes down to understanding what makes people like you, what makes people don't like you. How do you create an emotion that you desire? And I can tell you, I live in Washington, D.C., and certain nights when I go to play poker here at the casino here locally, I'll wear a Pittsburgh Penguins jersey, knowing that I will immediately polarize those that are Washington Capitals fans. And people are like, well, Brian, why would you want them to hate you to begin with? And for me, it's like, well, if they're off their game, then it gives me an advantage, right? And I can understand that they're going to make certain decisions based on an emotion based on what I'm wearing. And if I'm good at avoiding those emotional decisions, I can have the advantage. And I think it's the same thing with what I do on stage, is that I want to read people's body language. I want to go with where they're going. And I'm also, kind of understanding that, this emotional roller coaster that we live on, it's nothing new. It's what worked offline for years. It's what my dad always instructed with me growing up. And I was the bad kid. Every time my dad would give me advice, especially, in 2003 to 2010, probably, I would tell my dad, sure, but that's not in social media. Dad, we live in a digital world. You didn't have a phone, Dad. And funny enough, now, looking back, I have to go back to my dad a lot and be like, well, Dad, you were right. A handshake is the most important, looking in someone's eyes, understanding what they care about. And so I try to kind of connect those dots even in this digital world. And it's leveraging that emotional connection on poker, but also the ability to relate with people in this world full of, kind of bad news and fake news. How do we get people to open their mind? And it's a fun challenge and something I enjoy taking on a daily basis.
Brian, I want to take a tech gearing way of driving this conversation. I want to talk tech with you here.
Let's do it.
Issues in technology or in business or in the way we communicate with one another through technology that you are seeing as one of the big challenges, and where your message and your opinion is resonating the most today.
So I think this is a home run. You set me up perfect for this one.
That's called the volleyball bump, set, and take me home.
Nice bump. Yes, I like that. I played hockey in college, so it's the perfect assist. All I gotta do is throw it in the back of the goal. And for me, we still are trying to use technology to solve people problems. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the technology that I think ends up being the stuff that we remove the most are things that are productivity software or collaboration software or communication software, which sounds completely backwards because you're like, wait a second, we should be using digital and apps and technology to increase all of these things. But the problem is, and this goes into culture, this goes into every business that's out there. When you're looking at new technology to deploy or install, the question we have to ask ourselves is this technology going to solve the problem? And then what does success with this technology actually look like? And I think we oftentimes don't go there. We realize, okay, our company is remote. Everyone works differently and no one's communicating. Let's give them a tool to communicate. And that's where that's kind of, then we research tools and then we throw a tool at it. Well, then the tool doesn't work because no one's using that communication tool for whatever reason. Maybe it's because Android versus Apple, or maybe it's because they feel like their company's looking over their shoulder, or whatever it may be. And we realize, okay, that software didn't work. But in this world where we can swipe a credit card, we just go find another piece of software and we throw it right back in there. And then we're like, oh my goodness, it still didn't work. Sadly, we go back to a third set of technology, and then we'll throw that out there. And then we'll go, well, I guess we just need to remove the technology. And I think what we have to do is we have to come back and say, are we is our culture built from a people perspective to inspire open communication and collaboration? Is trust established to where transparency and vulnerability is rewarded? Or do we say those things on our website, but yet we've never seen anyone be vulnerable or transparent to inspire us to do it? And so that's where I look at our, in this world where we can swipe a credit card thanks to cloud computing and we can install anything we want, we have to kind of come back and say, let's solve people problems with people. And then let's look at technology to scale. Let's look at technology to amplify. Let's look at technology to take things to the next level. But I think in this, swipe a credit card and download software world we're looking at, it's why I got turned into a change evangelist, because I would look at something and say, why is this is taking us 5 steps and requiring someone to do something that's uncomfortable versus doing what we originally wanted to do, which was 3 steps. Like, why is the technology there? And if it is there, let's set things up on the people side to make the technology work. And it's crazy. In 2019, I still think that's a massive case in every business. And I would even argue in most people's personal lives, when the apps that they're using or downloading, or even, hey, I'm going to disconnect from DirecTV. I'm no longer going to use TV. And then all of a sudden we realize that we have to sign up for 13 different live streaming accounts, that Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. And by the end of it, we realized that we disconnected or cut the cable because we thought it was a trendy thing to do. And yet we now have just as big of a payment. And now we have more things to log in. And the question became, why did we cut the cord to begin with? And I think, that's the greatest example I can use. And I think it comes down to this basic principle where before we look at technology in a problem scenario, we have to ask ourselves, what is the goal? And then what does success look like? And if the technology doesn't help us save time or be more productive to accomplish that success, then we probably shouldn't deploy the technology, which is weird coming from a guy that talks about, living around on the emerging technology world.
Which is why your message of change and being that change agent is so apropos, and which is really what you need to think about first before figuring out how to do it. I want to pull the hat off, but I'm the balding guy, so I'm not going to do that to the backwards cap guy. I want to get under the skin here and understand a little bit more about Brian Fanzo. And you are killing it. You're on stage. You got the high energy. Our listeners have already felt and got that vibe, even when the buzzer of your beeper is still not vibrating. On the days when you're a little flat, maybe not truly on your A game, when you're having trouble thriving, who or what practice do you seek to get back on the thriving track?
Ooh, okay. That's a good one too. I like that question because so I was diagnosed ADHD at 31 years old, and it was
that explains so many things.
It does. And it was one of the greatest days for me. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm still medicated now. I still take medicine twice a day to this day. But for me, it wasn't because of the medicine. It was more of this weight lifted off my shoulders that I was different. I do things a different way. I struggled through school really badly. And, even realizing back in school, my mom was kind of told that I might need to be on medicine. But at the time, it was you were a bad mom if you medicated your kid. And so for me, when I look at like my life and, I went through a divorce about 4 years ago, and a lot of the things kind of came to me. And one of them was self-awareness. And I always was the passionate, be yourself guy. I had no problem talking, as the listeners have heard. But one of the things I was really not really good at was being self-aware. And this came down to knowing what I don't know. It came down to understanding what I work best. Like right now, I can tell you, as soon as we're done doing this interview, I'm taking the next 4 hours off of the day, which is pretty much like 1 p.m. till 5, which kind of sounds crazy, but I realized it was when I was least productive. And so that's when I do things around my house, is when I, go pick up my kids. And then I kind of tap back in at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night. And I kind of embrace this new idea of working when I work best, not working based on what the society says I work best. And so with that being said, when I look, I love what I do. Like in my spare time, I consume a lot of content around technology and social media. I'm the guy that, I have 2 iPhones because I have one that's jailbroken with a beta software and one that's not. Like, excuse me, that's who I am. But when you ask the question, like, where do I find motivation? So podcasts for me are where I consume content. But funny enough, they're not usually business or marketing podcasts. They're podcasts where either the interviewer is inspiring me based on their line of questions. It could be on the production value of the podcast, or documentaries. I am a huge fan of documentaries to the point where I watch most documentaries 2 or 3 times. The first time I watch it as a consumer. The second time I watch it as trying to predict what the agenda was of the person writing the documentary, because we know the bias in every documentary exists, just like bias in news. And then the third time I look at it and I'll watch something back. And these go from murder mystery documentaries to sports documentaries to the Fire Festival documentary. And I really try to dissect, what's the emotional feeling? Why did I have this reaction to this comment, to this color? And so I love going way outside of my space. And it's so funny. I'm like, right now I'm watching a lot of TikTok videos, which is a new app that actually has more downloads in the last 2 years than Facebook does. And people are like, well, Brian, why are you there? Like, it's a bunch of teenagers and younger creators. And for me, part of it is I want to understand why people are drawn to this message. Why are more people engaging there than they would on Twitter or Instagram? And so I really work hard. If I'm struggling for inspiration, I change my location. I'll go to a coffee shop. I'll go for a walk. But more so than anything else, I will tap in to 30 minutes or 45 minutes of another piece of content that is completely outside of business to kind of just allow myself to be kind of wrapped up in there. I mean, my favorite podcast at the moment for that is it's hosted by Dax Shepard, which is Kristen Bell's husband. He was the man behind Punk'd, but his podcast is called Armchair Expert.
Awesome. Great show.
It's a really long podcast. He interviews celebrities, but he does it at a very vulnerable level where he talks about alcohol abuse and a lot of these things where he gets celebrities to open up at a level that you've never heard before. I mean, Dog the Bounty Hunter, if you're familiar with him, he was on a recent episode and Dog is crying halfway through the episode because he's opening up about things that he's never been asked before. And so that's a podcast for me that if I'm struggling, I just fire that on for 30, 45 minutes and it allows me to take a break, but also get inspired in a way that, I can't really do by listening to something in my own space.
Brian, we'll send you back to a couple episodes of Thrive Loud to Mark Tyler Nobleman, who is behind the documentary Batman and Bill, which will get you totally, you'll love it. Go back and listen. It's a couple of weeks before you. And the episode is all about the real creator of Batman, not just Bob Kane, and how he helped in the initiative to get the credit to Bill Finger on getting him the credit he wanted. It's the most unbelievable story and documentary you'll ever watch. We'll talk about that offline. But anyway, good for you to focus on, and great message of all the things of tapping into content to figure out how to get yourself that's unrelated to what you do, which is awesome. So I love hearing these stories. We have so many different things that people do, and that's a fun one for you, and not surprising when you think about it. Let's do this. Let's do the plug part, because we're going to finish up with the most fun questions ever we've had with Brian here. Share with the listeners all the places people can find you, websites, social media. You know how to do this better than most. We'll put it all in the show notes, but it's always better when they hear from you.
Sure. Yeah. So, one of the things I preach is consistency. I think in this crazy digital world, there's so much disconnect and so many places to go. So my name of my company and my personal brand kind of is iSocialFanz. It's the letter I. I'm an Apple fanboy. So it's iPhone, iPad, iSocialFanz. My last name's Fanzo, so that's kind of how that fit in there. So it's iSocialFanz with a Z or a Z at the end. I'm active on pretty much every social network you can imagine. If you find a social network that I don't have an account on, I would love to know which one that is, because I'm pretty much active everywhere. My media hub and where you can find my podcast is iSocialFanz.com, the website. And then I have a new speaker website that I just launched earlier this year at brianfanzo.com. So brianfanzo.com. And if you're looking for a podcast, the podcast that I host, I don't do any interviews. It's a solo one where I just share my thoughts for about 30 minutes a week. It's called FOMO Fans, FOMO, or Z, where I try to cure your fear of missing out around digital technology, entrepreneurship, and marketing. So I know you got some podcast fans out there. So check me out there. And, always happy. I like to say I'm everywhere. I create a lot of content. So don't feel the need to follow me everywhere. Pick your favorite channel, your favorite vehicle, and give me a follow there. And let me know you heard me on the episode. And I would love to connect and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brian. We'll put all of it in the show notes. Now we're going to have a little more fun. Not that we haven't been having fun from the very beginning, but even more fun than we've already been. All right. First of all, we're going to bond over this because I got a preview of this. Your all-time favorite movie?
My all-time favorite movie is Heat.
And why does that movie connect with you?
Oh, it's the production of it, the Pacino versus De Niro, the good guy, bad guys having goatees versus no goatees. I mean, it's a bank robbery movie that is a psychology thriller. And for me, it was, I liked movies like Speed, and I liked The Fugitive with Harrison Ford growing up. And it was like taking Speed and The Fugitive together with De Niro versus Pacino in that movie Heat. It's one my girlfriend recently, about a couple months ago, was like, I watched it, but I watched it a long time ago. So we sat down and watched it again, and she looked at me and she's like, it is amazing. And I was like, it kind of is. And so it's one that I've loved since day one. I will watch it anytime it's on TV.
One of the best rewatchable movies you'll see, and some of the best dialogue you can ever get in. But anytime a heist movie is the center of what's going on, it just makes it even better. It's so good. I'm with you on that. So we bond over this. When I saw it in the notes, I'm like, oh, I love this guy. All right, so we're going to go to the Steel Town right now. I want to talk about a certain sandwich that I'm sure you're very familiar with. Okay. I've been to a lot of Pittsburgh. I used to cover a lot of clients in Pittsburgh, so I used to go there a lot, and been to Pirates games, Penguins games. I've even been to a Steeler football game as well. Are you a fan of the Primanti sandwich?
Ooh. So I can tell you, when I lived in Pittsburgh growing up, I was not a fan. I was not a fan of putting French fries and coleslaw and everything else on the sandwich. But as it became more popular, I was living in Virginia, and my family, we still have season tickets for the Steelers, so we go back to a lot of games. I started to be like, wow, everyone loves this sandwich. And I can tell you, it was probably about 7 years ago, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try it again. And I was freezing cold at a Steeler game, and I ate the sandwich, and I liked it. And so then I was like, well, I'm going to try it with my oldest daughter. And so I took my oldest daughter there, and she loved it. And now, of course, they allow you to customize it. So asking me today, I am a fan of the Primanti Brothers sandwich. You can get it kind of customized in different ways. But growing up, in Pittsburgh, it was one of those things where I was like, people eat this, but now it's definitely a staple.
I've gone in a couple of times, and it's kind of like I have to have it when I'm there, and I wouldn't have it anywhere else. Anyone that tried to imitate it, I wouldn't even do it. So it would never happen that way. Last question here: as the Pittsburgh fan that you are, can you rank your favorite Pittsburgh teams in order, top to bottom?
Ooh. So I mean, I played hockey in college. Hockey was like kind of my love growing up, but Steelers is where I remember my dad taking my first Cleveland Brown game, and really, being ingrained. I mean, the tattoo I have on my leg is a Steeler logo. So I'm a Steelers fan first, a Penguins fan second, and then a Pittsburgh Pirates fan third. But I can tell you, I love my Pirates. It's one of those things where I think in a blue collar town, we have lots of championships. We're kind of spoiled as Penguins fans and Steelers fans. But it's kind of refreshing to be regrounded as a Pirates fan, as understanding what losing is, and constantly having hope and then having it crushed. And so Steelers, Penguins, Pirates is definitely the order I would take those three teams.
Brian Fanzo, truly a pleasure to get you on the show. It finally happened, Thrive Loud listeners. We joked before we hit record that Brian and I have crisscrossed our paths in so many different ways, and I literally think I sent a message to him. I go, how is it that you haven't been on Thrive Loud yet? And I'm glad we waited. I'm glad you're here, and our listeners finally got it to connect with you, and hopefully you had fun too.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast, and like I say, it took long to happen, but let's make it more reoccurring in the future, and it was a pleasure.
Hear, hear. And to all our Thrive Out listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond. Now that you've heard this amazing episode, you really need to subscribe and hear all our episodes. Head on over to thriveloud.com and subscribe on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Thrive Loud. Thanks for listening.